Welcome to the Cheating Confession Reddit channel. Today, I'm going to share with you a real-life cheating story. It will give you a better understanding of the issue of infidelity today and help you be more cautious when it comes to a cheating wife. Let's dive into this story together.
The balmy summer breeze drifted through the open window, nudging the lace curtains into a soft, rhythmic dance and casting fleeting patterns across the dining room floor. Flynn sat frozen at the table, his hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had long since cooled, untouched. His fingers drummed a sporadic beat against the table's wooden surface. In the kitchen, Isabella moved methodically, slicing vegetables with practiced precision. "Flynn, you've barely said a word today," she commented, her gaze fixed on her task. After rinsing the knife under a steady stream of water, she placed it on the counter. "What's on your mind?" she asked, her tone light but probing. Flynn hesitated, uncertainty swirling within him. His eyes shifted to Mia, who stood by the stove, quietly stirring a pot of soup. She hummed a soft tune, the melody oddly cheerful against the backdrop of Flynn's inner turmoil. Her humming felt out of place, almost surreal, given the weight of what Flynn had discovered the previous night. "Just thinking," he muttered finally, his voice barely audible. His gaze lingered on Mia longer than he intended. She caught his eyes and offered a brief, unreadable smile. "You overanalyze everything, Flynn," Isabella teased with a chuckle, setting a glass of iced tea in front of him. "Sometimes you just need to stop thinking and start living." Flynn managed a weak smile, but her playful remark clashed sharply with the storm inside him. The truth he carried felt suffocating, clawing at his throat, yet he swallowed it back. "Need help with anything, Mia?" Isabella asked, drying her hands on a towel. Mia turned, her expression steady and polished. "No, I've got it, thanks," she replied smoothly, her tone calm and composed. Flynn's eyes drifted to her nails, painted a vivid red, the same color she often wore on nights she claimed were spent with friends. The memory of last night's text hit him like a cold wave. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Last night was unforgettable." The sender's name, Esteban, had sent a chill through Flynn. His fists clenched beneath the table, nails digging into his palms. "Flynn, you're zoning out again," Isabella said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Are you okay?" He snapped out of his trance. "Yeah, just distracted," he replied, evading her gaze. "Well, don't let it ruin your appetite. Mia worked hard on this meal," Isabella said, her tone carrying a mild reproach. As if on cue, Flynn's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced down at the screen to see another message from Esteban, this time without a subject. His stomach twisted. "Who is it?" Mia asked, not turning from the stove. "Work stuff," Flynn lied, locking the screen and slipping the phone into his pocket. "They really can't leave you alone, can they?" Isabella sighed, shaking her head. Flynn nodded vaguely, his thoughts spiraling. He couldn't keep ignoring the signs. The late-night texts, the whispered phone calls, the unexplained absences, all of it pointed to the truth he had been too afraid to face. Last night had erased any doubts. When Mia's phone buzzed on the nightstand, Flynn's suspicion got the better of him. The message from Esteban confirmed everything he feared. "Lunch is ready," Mia announced, her voice cutting through his thoughts. She carried the steaming pot to the table and set it down with practiced ease. Flynn watched her, searching for any flicker of guilt. How could she carry on so effortlessly? Did she feel nothing? As they ate, the conversation flowed between Isabella and Mia, touching on weekend plans, school activities, and the weather. Flynn remained silent, lost in his own mind. "You're barely eating," Isabella observed, glancing at his untouched plate. Flynn poked at his food with his fork. "Not hungry," he murmured. "Don't be ridiculous. You need your strength. Your family depends on you," Isabella chided, her words cutting deeper than she likely intended. Family. The word rang hollow to Flynn. Was this still a family? Mia caught his eye, her confident smile faltering for the first time. "Is something wrong?" she asked softly. Flynn considered exposing her deceit then and there, but stopped himself. "I'm fine, just tired," he replied. Isabella chuckled, trying to lighten the mood. "You're always so hard on yourself. It's no wonder you're worn out. Mia reached across the table, her fingers brushing his hand. Her touch felt icy. If there's something you need to say, you can tell me, she said gently. Flynn pulled his hand back, pretending to adjust his watch. I said I'm fine. The rest of the meal passed in uncomfortable silence. Isabella began clearing the dishes, while Mia retreated to the living room with a fresh cup of coffee. Flynn stayed behind, gripping the edge of the kitchen sink and staring out the window, his mind a whirlwind of anger and doubt. Flynn, Isabella said quietly, approaching him. Something's bothering you. I can tell. Do you want to talk about it? He turned to her, his expression guarded. It's nothing, Mom, he said, his tone final. She frowned but didn't press further. The afternoon dragged on. Flynn paced the backyard, his phone clutched tightly in his hand. He reread Esteban's message over and over, each word feeding his anger. The back door creaked open, and Mia stepped onto the patio. Flynn? She called softly. He turned, his face unreadable. What is it? He asked curtly. She tilted her head, her faint smile unwavering. You've been avoiding me all day. If something's wrong, you can say it. For a moment, Flynn teetered on the edge of confrontation, ready to unleash the flood of emotions he had been holding back, but he stopped himself. I'm just tired, he said shortly, turning away. Mia lingered for a moment before heading back inside, leaving Flynn alone with his thoughts. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Flynn remained on the patio, staring into the encroaching darkness. A storm of emotions churned within him, rage, sorrow, and betrayal. He knew he couldn't stay silent forever, but the path ahead was unclear. Confronting Mia meant unraveling the delicate threads of everything he had built. And then there was the question of his brother. How could he face him? The evening ended as it had begun, with unspoken truths hanging heavily in the air. The faint clinking of silverware echoed from the dining room as the family gathered once more. Flynn's fork hovered over his plate, his food untouched. The weight of what lay ahead loomed over him, a shadow he couldn't escape. Seated across from Flynn, Mia burst into a lively laugh at one of Isabella's tales about the antics of her neighbor's troublesome dog. The sound jarred Flynn, a bitter echo of the illusion their life had become. You wouldn't believe it, Flynn, Isabella said, her hands gesturing energetically as she recounted the scene. The dog bolted straight into their pool. Poor Mr. Harris nearly lost his mind, Mia added with a soft giggle, delicately covering her mouth in an almost rehearsed manner. Maybe the dog was just trying to teach him to unwind. Flynn forced his lips into something resembling a smile, though it felt more like a grimace. The effort tightened his face, his thoughts elsewhere, fixated on the message he'd read earlier, Esteban's name glaring at him from the screen. It was undeniable proof of betrayal, and not just by his wife, but by his brother. Flynn, are you paying attention? Isabella asked, her brow arching as she noticed his distant expression. He blinked, snapping back to the moment. Yeah, Mom, just thinking, he said, his voice strained and hollow. Isabella's eyes narrowed, concern flickering across her face. You've been doing a lot of that lately. Is something bothering you? No, he replied quickly, his gaze darting to Mia. She tilted her head slightly, meeting his eyes with a neutral, unreadable expression. The meal stretched on, each bite of food tasteless to Flynn. His anger churned beneath the surface, thoughts spiraling into imagined confrontations. What would he say? How could he express the storm of emotions threatening to consume him? At last, he set his fork down with deliberate care. Mia, he said, his voice steady but laced with tension. We need to talk. Privately. The chatter at the table came to an abrupt halt. Isabella glanced between them, worry flashing in her eyes. Now? Mia asked, her smile faltering slightly. Yes, now, Flynn insisted, holding her gaze firmly. Mia hesitated, her fingers tightening subtly around her glass. Then, with a composed calm, she stood and smoothed her dress. All right, she said, following him down the hall to their bedroom. Flynn closed the door behind them and leaned against it for a moment before turning to face her. What's this about? Mia asked, her arms folding defensively across her chest. Flynn's throat felt parched as he searched for the right words. Finally, he said, "I know about you and Esteban." Her expression froze momentarily, her carefully crafted facade slipping as her eyes widened. But in a heartbeat she recovered, a smirk curling her lips. "Oh," she said with unsettling nonchalance, sitting on the edge of the bed. "So you know. Is that all you have to say?" Flynn's voice rose, raw with disbelief. "You're not even going to deny it?" Mia shrugged, her smirk deepening. "Why bother? You've already decided what you believe. So what now? Are you going to make a scene?" Her dismissiveness hit Flynn like a punch. He stepped closer, his hands trembling. "Why, Mia? Why would you do this to us? To our family?" "Why?" she echoed, her tone mocking as she tilted her head. "Maybe because you're boring, Flynn. You go to work, you come home, you play with the kids, and then you sleep. Where's the excitement? Where's the passion?" Flynn's jaw clenched. "Passion? You call betrayal passion? What about our vows, Mia? What about our children? Did none of that matter to you?" "Don't you dare bring the kids into this!" she snapped, her voice sharp and defensive. "I've been a good mother to them." Flynn let out a bitter laugh. "A good mother doesn't destroy her children's family for a fleeting thrill." Mia stood abruptly, her face mere inches from his, her eyes blazing. "You don't understand, do you? Esteban makes me feel alive. He's fun, he's spontaneous. Maybe you should take a lesson from him." Flynn recoiled, as if struck, his fists clenched at his sides, nails digging into his palms. "You're unbelievable," he whispered, his voice trembling with restrained fury. "And you're predictable," she shot back, brushing past him toward the door. Flynn's voice cracked with emotion as he called after her. "Mia, this isn't over." She paused at the door, her hand on the knob, and turned to face him. "Oh, it is, Flynn. You'll forgive me because that's what you do. You're too weak to do anything else." Without waiting for a response, she walked out, leaving him standing there, stunned. For a long while, Flynn remained frozen, staring at the empty doorway. His chest felt tight, each breath shallow. He wanted to yell, to smash something, to make her understand the depth of her betrayal. Instead, he sank onto the bed and buried his face in his hands. The house was oppressively quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator. From the kitchen, he could hear Mia and Isabella's voices, calm and steady, as if nothing had happened. Hours slipped by as Flynn sat alone, his thoughts racing. Confronting her hadn't brought relief, it only deepened the void. Her smirk and dismissive words replayed in his mind like a relentless echo. But as the night wore on, Flynn made a silent promise. This wasn't over. Mia might think she'd won, but she had no idea what lay ahead. Later that evening, Flynn sat in the living room, his hands clasped tightly as if holding himself together. The weight of Mia's betrayal pressed down on him like a suffocating tide. Seeking clarity or even a shred of solace, he prepared himself for a difficult conversation. Isabella entered the room carrying a tray with 2 steaming cups of tea. She set it down on the coffee table and took a seat across from him, her posture poised and calm. "You look like you haven't slept," she observed, sliding one of the cups toward him. "I haven't," Flynn admitted quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. He stared at the tea but didn't lift it. "Mom, I need to talk to you about Mia." Isabella's eyes softened as she studied Flynn's troubled face. "You're carrying something heavy," she said gently, though her words sought answers. "You've been so different lately." Flynn let out a long breath, bracing himself. "She's been unfaithful," he admitted, his voice weighted with pain. Isabella's hand hovered mid-motion, her cup forgotten. "What?" she said, her tone a blend of shock and sympathy. Flynn's reply was sharp and bitter, as though the name itself burned his throat. "With Esteban." He barely managed to say it. For a moment, silence stretched between them, Isabella's lips pressing into a thin line as her gaze wandered to the window, as if searching for clarity in the distance. At last, she exhaled, her head shaking in slow disbelief. "Flynn, hear me out," she began, her voice calm but resolute. Flynn leaned closer, his eyes searching hers for condemnation or support. Instead, her tone took on a measured, almost authoritative quality. Mia made a mistake. Flynn's face twisted in disbelief. A mistake? He echoed, his voice low and trembling with anger. Mom, she didn't just trip over her words. She slept with Esteban, your other son. How can you dismiss this as a mistake? Isabella's expression didn't waver. Because one impulsive act doesn't define an entire relationship, she replied, her tone steady. People falter, Flynn. You've faltered. I've faltered. And now Mia has faltered. That doesn't mean you abandon everything. Flynn's jaw tightened, his anger simmering beneath the surface. This isn't a lapse in judgment, Mom, he said, his voice cold and firm. It's a betrayal, deep and unforgivable. Isabella sat back, her demeanor hardening. Unforgivable? She repeated, her voice tinged with exasperation. Stop being so melodramatic. Do you have any idea how many marriages weather infidelity? Countless. You have children, Flynn. Are you prepared to shatter their lives over this? Flynn's hands curled into fists on his lap. So that's it? He asked, his voice shaking. Just forgive her and move on? Pretend it didn't happen? Yes, Isabella replied without hesitation. That's exactly what I'm saying. If you divorce Mia over this, don't expect my blessing. I won't stand by while you tear this family apart over something so small. Flynn's voice rose, incredulous. Small? Mom, she cheated on me with my own brother. How can you sit there and justify this? Isabella's gaze grew colder. Because family comes first, Flynn. Always. Mia is the mother of your children and Esteban is your brother. You cannot let one terrible choice destroy this family. Flynn stared at her, feeling the ground shift beneath him. You can't mean that, he said, his voice hollow. I mean every word, Isabella said firmly, folding her arms. This family has endured too much already. I won't let you throw it away over something that can be mended. Before Flynn could reply, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Mia stepped into the room, her expression composed but tinged with smugness. She leaned against the doorframe casually. Really, Flynn? She said, her voice dripping with mockery. Involving your mother in our issues? That's low, even for you. Flynn turned to her, barely containing his anger. You think I'm the problem here? He demanded. Mia smirked, her tone biting. Oh, I know you are, she said. If you'd paid half the attention Esteban does, we wouldn't be here. Flynn's voice shook with rage. Attention? You have the audacity to lecture me about attention? Mia shrugged as she moved further into the room, her demeanor dismissive. I'm just stating facts. Esteban knows how to make a woman feel valued. Maybe you should take notes. Flynn shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Leave, he said, his voice icy. Leave this room before I say something I can't take back. Mia tilted her head, feigning innocence. Oh, come on, Flynn, don't be so dramatic. You're predictable, it's honestly pathetic. Flynn's voice cracked, a mixture of anger and disbelief. Pathetic? Predictable? You call faithfulness and raising a family pathetic? Isabella stepped between them, her voice sharp and commanding. Enough, both of you. This isn't solving anything. Flynn pointed an accusing finger at Mia, his voice heavy with emotion. You've destroyed everything, he said. Turning to Isabella, his voice trembled with frustration. And you're enabling her. How can you defend this? Isabella's gaze was firm. Because I know what's at stake, she said. Your children need stability. If you leave Mia, they'll bear the brunt of the fallout. Flynn's voice was resolute. They'll suffer more living in a house built on lies. Mia laughed bitterly. Oh, please. Staying together is the best thing you can do for them. Do you think they'll thank you for tearing their family apart? Flynn's breath was unsteady, his fury barely contained. Don't lecture me about what's best for my children, he said coldly. You lost the right to speak on that the moment you betrayed me. Isabella placed a hand on his arm, her voice softening. Flynn, please, don't let your pride destroy what we've built. Flynn's tone was quiet but unwavering. This isn't about pride, Mom. It's about dignity, something you seem to have forgotten. Mia scoffed, crossing her arms. Dignity? You're so obsessed with your own ego that you can't see the bigger picture. Flynn stared at her, his resolve solidifying. "You're right about one thing, Mia. People make mistakes. Mine was trusting you." Without another word, he turned and walked out, ignoring Isabella's calls after him. His footsteps echoed in the hallway, followed by the slam of the front door. Outside, the cool evening air enveloped him as he stood on the porch, staring into the quiet night. The words of his mother and Mia replayed in his mind: family, stability, forgiveness, twisted and warped to excuse the inexcusable. Flynn knew one thing for certain: staying was no longer an option. The first light of dawn crept through the blinds as he perched on the edge of his bed, fingers tangled in his hair. His thoughts spiraled uncontrollably, his gaze fixed on the door leading to his children's room. Inside, Abigail and Victor slept peacefully, their quiet breaths a poignant reminder of the innocence he was desperate to protect. The house was silent, but Flynn's mind was anything but calm. The sting of Mia's betrayal and Isabella's ultimatum churned in his thoughts like an unrelenting storm. His eyes drifted to the duffel bag he'd packed during a sleepless night, standing ready by the door. His decision was final. Moving carefully, he approached the children's room and pushed the door open with painstaking care. Abigail was curled up beneath her pink blanket, clutching her well-loved stuffed bunny, while Victor lay sprawled on his back, his tiny chest rising and falling in steady rhythm. Flynn's heart clenched as he leaned against the doorframe. "This is for you," he whispered, the words barely audible. "I'll make sure you're safe from all this." The bedside clock blinked 6:30 a.m. Flynn knew he had a brief window before Isabella and Mia, both early risers, would leave for their planned shopping trip. Timing was everything. Moving with purpose, he prepared a simple breakfast of scrambled eggs and toast. The soft shuffle of footsteps behind him broke the quiet. "Daddy?" came Abigail's sleepy voice. She stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes, her hair adorably messy. "Good morning, sweetheart," Flynn said, crouching to her level. "How about some breakfast? Afterward, we're going on a little adventure." "Adventure?" she asked, her eyes lighting up despite her grogginess. Flynn smiled, tapping her nose gently. "Just you, me, and Victor. A special day for the three of us." By 8:30 a.m., Isabella and Mia had left the house. Flynn wasted no time. He guided the children back to their room, encouraging them to pack a few favorite toys and clothes into small backpacks. "Where are we going?" Victor asked, cramming action figures into his bag. "Not far," Flynn assured him, zipping up his own duffel bag. "Just someplace new, someplace safe." Abigail hesitated, her brow furrowing. "Is Mommy coming?" Flynn knelt in front of her, his expression soft but firm. "Not this time, honey. This is just for us." Once everything was packed, Flynn carried their bags to the car. He took a final walk through the house, his eyes lingering on the wedding photo in the living room. His jaw tightened, but he didn't look back as he turned off the lights and locked the door behind him. The drive to their new apartment was subdued. The children, sensing their father's tension, remained quiet, watching the world blur past their windows. Eventually, Victor broke the silence. "Where are we going, Daddy?" "To a place where we can all be happy," Flynn said, forcing a smile. The apartment was small but clean, with 2 modest bedrooms and a cozy living room. Flynn had arranged everything days earlier, paying up front to avoid complications. The children explored their new surroundings with cautious curiosity. "Can we put our toys here?" Abigail asked, pointing to a corner of the living room. "Of course," Flynn said, kneeling to help her unpack. "This is our home now." For the rest of the morning, Flynn kept busy. He laid out the children's bedding, organized their toys, and stocked the kitchen with essentials. By midday, his phone buzzed on the counter. The caller ID read Isabella. He hesitated before answering. "Hello, Flynn." Isabella's voice was sharp with concern. "Where are you? What's going on?" "I'm not coming back," Flynn said, his voice steady but unyielding. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. "Mia just called me. The house is empty and the kids are gone. Have you lost your mind?" "I'm doing what's best for my children," Flynn replied firmly. "They deserve better than what we had in that house." Isabella's tone turned icy. "You're being selfish. Do you have any idea what this will do to them? To Mia? To me?" I know exactly what it will do, Flynn said, unshaken, and I've already made my choice. You're making a huge mistake, Isabella hissed. You'll regret this. Mark my words. I've already made enough mistakes, Flynn said, ending the call. He set the phone face down on the counter and silenced it. The afternoon passed peacefully. Flynn played board games with the children and read them stories, trying to keep the weight of his decision from showing. For the first time in weeks, he felt a semblance of control. But as they sat down to dinner, the phone vibrated again. This time the number was unfamiliar. Against his better judgment, he answered. "Hello?" he said cautiously. "Is this Flynn?" a woman's voice asked, her tone professional but urgent. "Yes, this is Flynn. This is Nurse Avery from St. Mary's Hospital," the voice continued. "Your mother and wife are here in the emergency room. There's been an accident. You need to come immediately." Flynn's stomach dropped. "What happened?" "I can't discuss details over the phone," the nurse said gently, "but I strongly recommend you come as soon as possible." Flynn froze, his mind racing. His eyes darted to Abigail and Victor, who were giggling over a spilled drink, blissfully unaware. "I'll be there soon," he said finally. Ending the call, he stood motionless in the living room, the weight of reality pressing down on him. The chaos he'd tried so hard to leave behind had found him again. Questions swirled. What kind of accident? How serious? Did he even want to know? "Daddy?" Abigail's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Are you okay?" Flynn knelt to her level, forcing a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. I just need to step out for a little while. Miss Mia from next door will come stay with you, okay?" Abigail gave a subtle nod, her face tight with unease. "You'll be back, right?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Flynn pressed a quick kiss to her forehead. "Always," he assured her. But as he grabbed his keys and stepped outside, an unsettling sense of dread settled in his chest. He knew that whatever awaited him at the hospital would once again disrupt his life. The moment Flynn entered the hospital, his heartbeat thundered in his ears. The acrid smell of disinfectant assaulted his senses as he rushed past the reception desk, only vaguely registering the nurse's directions to the waiting area. His eyes immediately landed on Isabella and Mia. Isabella paced back and forth, her face drained of color and etched with worry. Mia sat hunched over in a chair, nervously twisting a crumpled tissue in her trembling hands. As soon as Isabella spotted him, she hurried toward him. "Flynn," she said, gripping his arm with urgency. "Thank God you're here." He pulled away from her grasp, his expression hard. "What happened?" Isabella's lip quivered as tears brimmed in her eyes. "It's Esteban," she managed to say, her voice breaking. "He was in an accident. A terrible one." Flynn's jaw tightened. "What kind of accident?" Isabella hesitated, glancing toward Mia, who looked equally hesitant. Finally, Mia stood, her face streaked with tears. She took a small step forward, her voice shaky as she explained. "We were coming back from the mall. The car. It lost control. They think it was a blowout." Flynn's stomach churned, though his expression remained unreadable. "Is he alive?" Isabella nodded quickly, dabbing her eyes with the sleeve of her jacket. "Yes, but he's barely holding on. He's in surgery now." Crossing his arms, Flynn looked between them. "And why is this my problem?" "Flynn, please," Mia implored, reaching out for his hand. He stepped back, leaving her grasping at air. "We need you. Esteban needs us. We've all made mistakes, but we're still family." "Family?" Flynn's bitter laugh echoed through the room. "Now you want to use that word?" Mia winced, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I know we hurt you," she said, her voice trembling. "But this is bigger than all of that. We have to stick together." "Stick together?" Flynn's voice rose, drawing a glance from a passing nurse. "Do you even hear yourself? You destroyed this family with your lies, and now you want me to act like none of it happened?" Isabella stepped closer, placing a cautious hand on his shoulder. "Flynn, I know you're angry," she said softly. "But this isn't the time to hold on to grudges. Esteban's life is hanging by a thread." Flynn's eyes flashed with anger as he turned to face her. "Don't lecture me about family," he snapped. "You stood by and let all of this happen, and now you want me to be the good son? I'm done." Isabella's face crumpled, but before she could respond, Mia fell to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. I messed up, Flynn. I was selfish and I ruined everything, but please don't abandon us now. I'll do whatever it takes to make things right. Flynn looked down at her, his face unmoved. Anything? He asked with a sharp edge to his voice. Like stop lying? Like taking responsibility for what you've done? Forgive me if I'm skeptical. Mia clutched at his leg, desperation clear in her eyes. Please, she whispered, don't let us fall apart. Flynn stepped back, leaving her hands to fall away. His gaze shifted between Isabella and Mia, his expression resolute. You want me to forgive and forget? Not happening. The room fell into a heavy silence, broken only by Mia's muffled sobs. Isabella stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. Flynn let out a sharp breath and turned toward the hallway leading to the surgical wing. Where is he? He asked, his tone flat. The ICU waiting room, Isabella said, pointing shakily. They'll let us know when he's out of surgery. Without another word, Flynn walked away. The ICU waiting room was cold and quiet, the steady hum of fluorescent lights filling the space. Flynn sat in a corner, his hands resting on his knees, his gaze fixed on the tiled floor. He hadn't come for Esteban. Not really. He wasn't even sure why he'd come at all. His thoughts wandered to his children, safe in their new home. They were the only thing anchoring him in the chaos. The door creaked open, and Isabella entered hesitantly. She sat down beside him, leaving a small distance between them. Flynn, she began quietly. Don't, he interrupted. She sighed, twisting her wedding ring anxiously. I know I've failed you, she admitted. I should have stood by you when it mattered most. I made mistakes, but Esteban, he's still your brother. Flynn's expression was unreadable as he looked at her. And what's that supposed to mean to me now? It means there's still a chance to repair things, Isabella said, her voice breaking. For all of us. He shook his head, a grim smile tugging at his lips. You don't get it. Some things are beyond fixing. Some bridges are burned for good. Before she could respond, the door opened again, and a doctor stepped inside. Tall and weary, his scrubs bore dark stains. Family of Esteban Blake? He asked. Both Flynn and Isabella stood. How is he? Isabella asked anxiously. The doctor removed his cap with a sigh. He's stable for now, but he's critical. The next 24 hours will be pivotal. Isabella clasped her hands together, murmuring a prayer under her breath. Flynn remained silent, his expression inscrutable. Can we see him? Isabella asked. One at a time, the doctor replied. Isabella turned to Flynn. Do you want to go first? No, Flynn said curtly. You go. As Isabella followed the doctor down the hallway, Flynn sank back into his seat. His thoughts churned, but he couldn't pin down what he felt. Anger, regret, or maybe nothing at all. The weight of the past and present bore down on him, leaving him unsure of what might come next. An indescribable void churned within him, a storm of emotions he couldn't quite name. When Isabella returned, her face streaked with tears, she whispered, barely audible, He's asking for you. Flynn hesitated, standing only after a moment of inner conflict. Whether driven by curiosity or the need for closure, he couldn't be sure. The hum of machines filled the hospital room where Esteban lay, his fragile frame almost swallowed by the bed. His skin was pallid, his eyelids drooping as if every blink cost him effort. Flynn, he croaked, his voice barely more than a whisper. Flynn stood at the foot of the bed, arms folded tightly across his chest. Esteban, he said flatly. I'm sorry, Esteban said, his words breaking under their own weight. I've made such a mess. I hurt you. Stop it, Flynn interrupted, his tone sharp. Don't waste your strength on apologies. We both know that sorry changes nothing. Tears began to fill Esteban's eyes. I just wanted to fix things, he murmured, his voice trembling. Flynn's jaw tightened as he shook his head. You made your choices, Esteban. Now you've got to live with them. A single tear traced its way down Esteban's face as Flynn turned on his heel, leaving the room without a backward glance. When he reached the waiting area, Isabella and Mia looked up at him, their faces expectant, silently pleading for some sign of hope. "Well?" Mia ventured cautiously. Flynn's face remained unreadable. "I said everything I needed to say," he replied. Without offering further explanation, he strode out of the hospital, his steps resolute, the past firmly left behind. For Isabella and Mia, the days dragged on, each one weighed down by the stark realities of their decline. The once vibrant household was now steeped in an oppressive stillness, its warmth replaced by despair. Piles of unopened bills collected on the dining table, a grim reminder of their financial struggles. One morning Isabella sat there, her hands trembling as she attempted to stretch her dwindling pension to cover their mounting expenses. "We'll have to sell more jewelry," she muttered, not looking up. Across the table, Mia pressed her fingers to her temples, frustration evident in every line of her face. "What's even left? You've already pawned your bracelets, and I've given up my wedding ring." Isabella exhaled heavily, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. None of this would have happened if Flynn hadn't been so stubborn. Mia's hand slammed against the table, the sound echoing through the quiet room. "Stubborn? You mean if he hadn't walked out after we—" She stopped abruptly, the weight of her unfinished sentence hanging between them. Isabella's glare was enough to silence her. "Don't even go there," she warned. "We just need to get through this. For Esteban." At the rehabilitation center, Esteban's former vitality had faded to a mere shadow. Weeks of surgeries and relentless therapy had drained him, leaving him confined to a wheelchair most days, his gaze fixed on the bleak courtyard outside. The accident had left him with a permanent limp and a pain that even medication couldn't fully numb. One afternoon, Mia arrived, carrying a bag of sandwiches that barely passed for homemade. "Hi," she greeted softly, placing the bag on the table beside him. Esteban turned his head slowly, his hollow cheeks and tired eyes revealing his exhaustion. "Mia," he said flatly, "what are you doing here?" His tone, sharp and cold, made her flinch. Still, she sat down. "I brought you something to eat. You need to keep up your strength." He let out a bitter snort. "Strength? For what?" His voice cracked as he gestured weakly at himself. "Look at me. I'm a wreck. I can't even stand without collapsing." "You'll get better," Mia said, though her voice betrayed the uncertainty behind her words. "Better?" he scoffed, narrowing his eyes. "We both know that's a lie, and even if I did, what would I have left? No job, no money, no family worth anything." Tears welled in Mia's eyes as she looked away. "We'll find a way. Together." Esteban let out a bitter laugh. "Together? Don't kid yourself. You're just as lost as I am." In stark contrast, Flynn's life had begun to thrive. With determination to rebuild for the sake of his children, he had created a home filled with laughter and love. The smell of home-cooked meals filled the modest apartment, and evenings were spent in warmth and joy. One night, his daughter Abigail ran up to him with a drawing she had made at school. "Look, Daddy," she exclaimed proudly, holding up her artwork. The picture depicted their small family, Abigail, Victor, and Flynn, smiling beneath a radiant sun. Flynn knelt to her level, his face lighting up. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Let's put it on the fridge." "Can we get ice cream tonight?" Victor chimed in, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Flynn chuckled. "Ice cream on a school night? I don't know about that." "Please?" the children begged in unison, their enthusiasm infectious. Relenting, Flynn ruffled Victor's hair. "All right, but only after homework. Deal?" At work, Flynn's efforts hadn't gone unnoticed. His focus earned him a promotion, bringing financial stability that allowed him to enroll his children in after-school activities. One afternoon, his colleague Linda complimented him as they reviewed a project together. "You're doing amazing, Flynn." "Thanks," he replied, glancing at the clock. "I just want to finish this up before leaving. Victor has soccer practice." Linda smiled. "You're a great dad. Your kids are lucky." For the first time in years, Flynn felt a deep sense of control over his life and gratitude for his hard-won peace. Back at Isabella's house, things continued to unravel. The electricity had been shut off for a week before they managed to scrape together enough money to pay the bill. The refrigerator held only a half carton of milk and a loaf of bread. Sitting in the dim light of a single candle, Isabella and Mia faced their grim reality. "We can't keep living like this," Isabella said, her voice heavy with despair. "What do you want me to do?" Mia snapped. "Pull money out of thin air?" Isabella's expression hardened. "We could call Flynn." Mia froze, her mother's suggestion hanging in the air like an impending storm. "You really think he'd help us, after everything?" "He's not heartless," Isabella said, though doubt colored her tone. Mia shook her head. "He's done with us, and honestly, I can't blame him." The weight of Esteban's condition loomed over them both. One evening, Isabella visited him at the rehab center, her resolve firm despite the strain etched across her face. "Mom," Esteban murmured as she entered, his voice weak. "You didn't have to come." She sat down beside him, her gaze steady. "Of course I did. I'm your mother." Looking down at his trembling hands, he whispered, "I've ruined everything, haven't I?" Tears welled up in Isabella's eyes as she pleaded, her voice quivering with emotion. "We've all endured so much, Esteban, but we can't stop now. We have to keep moving forward." "How?" Esteban's voice cracked under the weight of his despair. "Flynn's gone. He doesn't just dislike me. He despises all of us." Isabella reached out, gripping his hand firmly. "We've only got each other left, Esteban. That's the one thing we can't afford to lose." Months passed, and Flynn began to rediscover fragments of happiness. On a sunlit Saturday morning, he took Abigail and Victor to the park. The children dashed across the sprawling lawn, giggling as they soared on the swings, their laughter ringing through the air. Flynn watched them, a serene calm settling over him. In that moment, he understood something profound. He didn't need the family he had left behind to feel whole. His world, as it was now, felt complete. "Daddy," Abigail asked as they sat on a park bench savoring ice cream cones, "are we happy now?" Flynn pulled her close, a genuine smile lighting up his face. "Yes, sweetheart, we are." For the first time in years, he truly believed it. In the warm, inviting glow of a small cafe, Flynn sat across from Veronica, a woman he'd met through mutual acquaintances. Their connection had started innocuously enough, an exchange of pleasantries, a shared chuckle, but over time, it had blossomed into something far deeper. "You're awfully quiet today," Veronica said softly, stirring her tea. Her hazel eyes held his, curiosity mingling with concern. Flynn leaned back, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I'm just thinking. It's been a long road to get here. Here with me, or here in life?" she asked, tilting her head slightly. "Both," he replied, his voice reflective. "I never thought I'd let someone in again. But you've changed my perspective." Veronica reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "Flynn, you don't need to explain. I see it in how you love your children, how you carry yourself. You've endured so much, yet you've stayed resilient." Flynn chuckled softly. "I didn't have much choice. My kids deserved better than the mess I was in. I couldn't let them down." Their relationship grew naturally, marked by patience and understanding. Veronica's unwavering support never felt intrusive or demanding. She respected Flynn's boundaries, allowing their connection to deepen at its own pace. One crisp evening, they strolled through the park hand in hand, watching Abigail and Victor race ahead, their laughter filling the air. "They've grown so much," Veronica remarked, her voice filled with admiration. Flynn's expression softened as he nodded. "They're my everything. They've kept me grounded through all of this." "And you've been their rock," Veronica replied, giving his hand a gentle squeeze. "You've built something beautiful, Flynn. You should be proud." With Veronica, Flynn found a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. Their journey together was deliberate, each step bringing new hope. For the first time, Flynn dared to imagine a future where love didn't equal heartbreak. One evening, as they prepared dinner together, the kitchen filled with the aroma of roasted vegetables and garlic. Flynn laughed as a pot of pasta boiled over. "Guess I'm a bit out of practice," he admitted, wiping up the spill. Veronica smirked. "It's never too late to improve." Their laughter echoed through the kitchen, a sound Flynn hadn't realized he missed until then. Meanwhile, Isabella and Mia's lives continued to spiral downward. Financial struggles had forced them to sell the family home, leaving them in a cramped apartment in a rough part of town. Esteban, grappling with his own health challenges, had grown distant, leaving them to fend for themselves. One afternoon, Mia stared at the growing pile of bills on the table, her hands trembling. "I can't believe this is where we've ended up," she muttered bitterly. Across from her, Isabella sighed. If only Flynn had found it in his heart to forgive us. Mia's glare was piercing. "Do you really think this is his fault? We're the ones who destroyed everything. You stood by me when you shouldn't have. I betrayed him. What did we expect?" Isabella's expression hardened. "I expected him to value family above all else. Instead, he made himself out to be the victim." Mia's voice rose sharply. "Maybe because he was the victim. Look at what we did to him. How could you not see that?" Their argument fizzled into silence, leaving both women exhausted and defeated. Occasionally, either Isabella or Mia would call Flynn, their voices tinged with desperation. One afternoon, Isabella's voice cracked over the phone. "Flynn, it's your mother. I wanted to know how you and the kids are doing. I miss you all." Flynn leaned against the kitchen counter, his grip tightening on the phone. "You miss them now? Funny, you weren't thinking of them when you defended Mia." Isabella's quiet sobs echoed through the line. "I know I failed you, but please, Flynn, let us try to be a family again." His voice was resolute. "You made your choice. You chose her betrayal over me. My kids and I have moved on. Don't call again." He hung up, a surprising sense of relief washing over him. As the years passed, Flynn's life flourished. He and Veronica eventually married, blending their lives into a seamless harmony. Their wedding was a simple, intimate affair, shared with close friends and family. Abigail and Victor stood proudly beside Flynn, their faces beaming with joy. "Are you happy, Dad?" Victor asked that evening as they sat on the porch of their new home. Flynn looked at his son, his heart swelling with love. "More than happy. I'm at peace." Abigail leaned against his arm, her voice soft. "We're happy too. Veronica's really nice." Flynn kissed the top of her head. "I'm glad you feel that way. She's a big part of why everything feels right again." One afternoon, as Flynn watched Abigail and Victor playing in the backyard, Veronica handed him a steaming cup of coffee and sat beside him. "They're amazing, aren't they?" she said, her voice filled with pride. "They are," Flynn agreed, his gaze soft. Resting her head on his shoulder, Veronica smiled. "You've built something extraordinary, Flynn. For them, and for yourself." As Flynn took in the scene before him, a profound contentment settled over him. The pain of the past no longer held sway over his heart. He had rebuilt his life from the ground up, and it was everything he had ever dreamed it could be. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.